welcome everyone. 2 minutes past the official time. My name is Carlota Gomez. I'm head of international communications at Bayer. First of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of Bayer for the technical problems we had in the initial day. Sorry again, especially to the panelists that are joining us today, but here we are again and we are ready to go. Thanks for joining everyone in this session, in this live panel on a topic that unfortunately has become a big threat for food security and livelihoods in different parts of the world. Millions of desert locusts have been invading parts of East Africa, Asia, and Middle East for months now, and most recently also in Latin America, destroying farmlands and pastures. Let me give you just a couple of figures to bring things into perspective. A locust swarm of 1 square kilometer can eat the same amount of food in one day as 35,000 people. Today, we have invited experts, supporters, and affected people to talk about the plague, its effects, and possible resistance. So let's start with a quick introduction round. Welcome to the panelists today, and thanks for accepting the invite. Let's start with Mr. Kang.
Hello. Yeah, I'm a farmer based in northern part of India. I live on the farm itself, and I've been farming since 1984 for the last 36 years. I grow wheat, cotton, mustard, vegetables, and some backyard poultry for self-consumption. I try to help fellow farmers about the latest technologies in farming. I'm a member of the Global Farming Network. And only I had heard about the locust storm only, and this is the first time in 36 years I have experienced what it is.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Kang, and looking forward to hear your personal experience on this desert locust. Let's move to Mr. Cressman, please.
Thank you, Carletta, and good day to everybody. Thank you for participating. My name is Keith Cressman. I work for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, that's FAO. I'm based in Rome, Italy at its headquarters, and I've been working there 33 years. I am the organization's Senior Locust Forecasting Officer. So my job is to operate the organization's early warning, desert locust early warning system. This is a global system that monitors the locust, the environmental conditions, the weather conditions 24/7, and I provide forecasts and alerts about locust invasions and breeding. Over to you, Carletta. Thank you.
Thanks for joining, Mr. Cressman. I will hand over to Mr. Holger Kray.
Carletta, thank you also from my side, and a good day to everybody who has joined. My name is Holger Kray. I work with the World Bank. I'm the practice manager for agriculture food security. And one of my current roles is that I work with our teams that support the member states of the World Bank in their fight against the current locust situation. Thank you, Carletta.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you today with us. And last but not least, our colleague Jimmy Kiberu.
Thank you very much, Carlota, and thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Jimmy Kiberu. I'm based in Nairobi, and I work with Bayer Crop Science. As members of the private sector, we work with a number of public and private sector players to see how we can help bring solutions to farmers around the world in the area of controlling pests like desert locusts, and also ensuring food security in line with our vision of health for all and hunger for none. And I think that this kind of call is really an opportunity for us to come together and see how we can continue to collaborate to bring sustainable solutions to Africa and to farmers, especially smallholder farmers in this space. And thank you so much for organizing this. I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thanks, Jimmy. And before we start the discussion, a quick note to all the participants. We have roughly 300 people joining us today, and I will cordially invite you all to participate in the discussion. So we want this to be a lively and interactive discussion. So please use the comment function for this purpose, and I will see the comments and incorporate your questions as we move forward in the discussion. So let's start with a first block of topics, which is, let's try to bring everyone on the same page and to analyze the current situation. So let's just start with Mr. Kang. You are personally facing the locust plague yourself. Could you describe what you see when you go out to the fields?
Yeah, sure. We were all sitting outside in anticipation of the swarms movement as we were getting information from the villages where they were moving forward. And suddenly what we see, hundreds and thousands of locusts, the sky is covered by them and we couldn't see anything. It was all dark. And suddenly they started landing on the ground, but as we were prepared, everybody in the village was out in the fields. From say 5-year-old kids to 70-year-old people, everybody was trying to do his bit. We started running our tractors, removed the silencers. Anybody could get hold of whatever utensils, making sounds and trying to scare them away. But the one good thing about it was a combined effort, a community effort. It was not scattered people, some people in that field, some people. They were all together, moving together, making sounds, and it lasted about 15-20 minutes, and suddenly there was a wind movement, and they moved on. So we were saved this time, and I don't know what's going to happen next time. But if it would not have been a community effort, combined effort, I don't know what would have happened to my crop. And some people, some of my neighbors, they lost their crop. Where there was some humidity in the soil, they landed, it was very hot, around 43 Celsius, 44 degrees Celsius, and humid, landed there, and within minutes, there were no leaves, only the stem was left. But they moved on. Then they suddenly moved on, and we were saved for the day. Let's see what happens next.
Sounds very challenging, Mr. Khan. Could you also share with us what is the impact that this threat will have to your income and the life of your family?
Yeah. Farmers, we are very small landholders. In India, there are almost 80% farmers are smallholders. 1 hectare, 1.5 hectare, that's the land holding. And from these, hardly we make a living. And if this crop is lost, like I sow cotton, so whatever expenses have to be made have already been made. Diesel has been used, fertilizers have been applied, so as money has been spent on the seeds. Every investment that has to be done on the crop has already been done. Only the sprays are left. That's maybe 2 or 3 numbers are picking. That cost is left. Today, if I lose my crop, it takes almost about 3 years to recover. And in 3 years, I'll be standing where I was today. So, what happens? Okay, I can survive. I have some other resources, or I have some savings, or that is. But what will the small landholder do? He needs help today. If he loses his crop, immediately, he needs seeds, he needs fertilizers for an alternative crop, he needs help. But this locust attack is not covered under farm insurance in our country. It is not taken as a national disaster, so it's not covered. And farm insurance, okay, we are paying premiums, but this is not covered. So what happens is immediately, you need help immediately. And if the government is not out there, or he doesn't have any resource, so he cannot sow his next crop. So he loses his next crop also. Mm-hmm. So whatever help has to be provided should be immediate. And secondly, what happens, it's not only the economic effect, it's the psychological effect. The fear psychosis has set in. I've seen small farmers being worried, okay, what's going to happen if I lose my crop? What about my children? How will I feed them? How will I pay their school fees or their college fees? So these things are also coming up.
Okay, thanks, Thanks, Mr. Kang. And we will elaborate a little bit more later on the potential solutions. But let's move from India into Africa. Jimmy, you are located in Kenya. Can you give us a perspective on what's going on there? Describe a little the situation in Africa, please.
Carlota, I think the situation in Africa is not very different from the very sad explanation we've just had from Mr. Kang. I mean, when you look at 2020 and what has happened in the last 6 months, Africa, and I'm speaking from Kenya right now, has been visited by the biblical challenges that we used to read about the Bibles, because swans of that size, according to my grandmother, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, last appeared here in that size about 70 years ago. They are now back with a bang. And I can tell you that they've left a trail of destruction by their voracious appetite. But just to give you an idea of how bad the situation is, this has been one of the most challenging years, because if I can just walk you through some of the challenges, even before we talk about locusts, the farmers have had floods. The first part of the year was characterized by massive flooding in most of Kenya. Then it was followed by the African armyworms in the previous year. As we speak right now, farmers are battling with large flocks of grain-eating birds called, I think, Kray. They've been in Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, eating everything you can imagine. And of course, you have COVID-19. Now we talk about Locust 2020. So it has been one hell of a year. And I can tell you right now, if there was anything called food insecurity, it's right now with the farmers. Before I joined this call this morning, I had a call with the crop commissioner in some of the areas affected in Uganda. And he was telling us he was in the field over the weekend. And I think on July 10th, there was a new infestation that has just visited the area. And that particular area is borderline with Kenya. So you can imagine what's going to happen. So as they say in my language, it doesn't rain, it pours. So the farmers right now are facing a problem of biblical proportions. And I can tell you that this is going to be a very difficult year on food security. So in summary, I would say, Kaleta, is that I think the situation is very grim. The problem is live, and I think solutions are needed immediately. And I think through this kind of collaboration, we need to find solutions that will be able to help the farmer at least afford food security. Because without food security, I think we can only move from a bad problem into a worse problem. As they say, it's like moving from between a rock and a hard place. It's a very difficult time right now for the farmer.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. I mean, as you both described, this is extremely alarming situation, and actually the FAO already used that words. Why is such a great danger, and also why now? We are getting a lot of questions on the chat. Why now is this is a great danger? Maybe we can hand over to Mr. Chrisman from FAO.
Sure, of course. The situation this year, it just didn't, start immediately. It's been gradually building up for the past 2 years. The situation actually was ignited by 2 cyclones in 2018 that brought very, very heavy rains to a different part of the world, to the Arabian Peninsula, to a place called the Empty Quarter, which is, completely empty. There's nothing there. So the locusts took advantage of, this situation. They bred for 9 consecutive months. So that's basically 3 generations of breeding. That's about an 8,000-fold increase in locusts from about June of 2018 until March of 2019. Then, of course, at that point, the conditions dried out for the locusts. Locusts, they migrate with the winds. Some of them went north into Iran and then later into Pakistan and India, as we've heard. Others went south into Yemen and then crossed into the Horn of Africa and into Kenya, as we've heard. So this is a response to very, very good weather conditions, not only in 2018, but basically the weather has been cooperating with the locusts since then, for the past 2 years. Good rains, as we've heard, floods, This is exactly what locusts need to continue to increase in numbers, and then they form these, very dangerous and devastating swarms.
Okay, thank you. And would you say that this is the worst plague in 25 years, as some people describe? Would you agree with that sentence?
Well, first, we're not at a plague yet, so it could get worse. A plague would be essentially if we had desert locust swarms all the way from West Africa across northern Africa through Arabia and to India and down in East Africa. Fortunately, we don't have that situation yet. We're at the stage below that, something called an upsurge. It certainly is the worst upsurge that we've seen in the last 15 years. The last one was 2003, 2005. The last locust plague was in the late 1980s. But if you take a country like Kenya, this is the worst situation they've seen in more than 70 years. They've only seen locusts twice during that period. Once in 2007 for a couple of months, and then in the 1950s. And in the 1950s, of course, it was just utter, destruction. And this is what is remembered, as Jimmy mentioned, passed through the grandparents and through the children, in the living memories in the history of the country. Other countries like South Sudan, Uganda, they haven't seen locust swarms since 1961. So nobody in the current generation has seen these type of swarms. So it's very difficult to, know how to respond. And in that situation, panic, is the normal response.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Mr. Kray, do you want to add something on why this is such a great danger?
Yeah, thank you very much. What makes it particularly alarming is also that it hits a sub-region in which food systems are already under extreme stress. I want all our participants to clearly understand it's not a locust situation that emerges in an otherwise relaxed food security situation. It hits currently some of the countries in which we see the world's most poorest and most fragile countries. Let me take an example, Yemen at the epicenter of the locust crisis. It's estimated that 4 out of 5 people live below the poverty line. So their livelihoods are compromised to a degree that we have not seen in years. Let's zoom out a little in the greater Horn of Africa. So the region we're discussing right now, already 22.5 million people are severely food insecure. 11 million people are forcibly displaced from their homes. And now imagine that in this situation, they experience a situation that Mr. Kang has been outlining earlier. Quite a bit of the public discussion, rightly so, is around crops. But let's not forget the impact on livestock. And that to me is one of the most severe impacts. We've been running some estimates, and we estimate that for the immediate Horn of Africa, the immediate damage to livelihoods, only for 2020, so this is a really narrow scenario, amounts to round about $9 billion damage to livelihoods. This has to be absorbed by the population in terms of damage. And a good 2/3, 3/4 of that is damage to livestock-based livelihoods. Because, see, locusts do not only eat maize and crops, they eat anything green. And so particularly livestock farmers who have all their savings, all their investment, their genetic investment over generation in their livestock herd, see themselves forced to do distress sales or lose their livestock. And this is not easily recovered. It's not, I don't want to belittle the damage that the maize farmers incur, but to re-establish the livestock-based livelihoods is even more difficult. We are very concerned of protracted impact on livelihood that will last for a couple of years. Countries, fortunately, have been very good in taking first initial steps, particularly under the technical leadership of our colleagues at the FAO. Many of us development partners come in, we'll talk about it later, and we're very, very carefully observing, actually under Keith's leadership, whether and how the current situation sort of expands potentially into West Africa or other geographies. Back to you, Carla.
Yeah. What about Latin America? Could some of you give a very short overview of what is the situation in Latin America and maybe what is the prognosis there? Any thoughts on that?
Well, maybe I could just give you a brief overview of the situation. There are times every now and then that, locusts do explode in Latin America, Central America, as well as in South America. And this is, again, always due to response of good weather conditions, good environmental conditions. This is what's happened this year in mainly northern Argentina, which is a general breeding area for locusts. And then, they've expanded now outside of that area with the winds. They've been blown north into parts of Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, corners of Brazil. So, as we've heard, from Mr. Kang and from Jimmy, the destruction is kind of quite similar. Usually it's a less voracious, it's a less dangerous species of locust. This is a different species. This is not desert locust. It's something appropriately called the South American locust. But yes, it does flare up from time to time. And countries, they have to manage it very rapidly. And if it does get out of control, then, it's the farmers, it's the pastoralists that Holger has been mentioning, that really suffer. And this, we don't want to see.
Yeah, thanks. Let's add another layer of complexity. So this crisis is building on top of coronavirus, right? So experts fear that this corona crisis could turn into a famine crisis. Now that the plague of locusts is added to this. So what does it mean for the population that are affected by coronavirus and let's say the farmers living there? I mean, how this combination looks like? Maybe, I don't know, Mr. Kray or Mr. Cressman, do you want to elaborate on this?
You're very happy to come in. Carlotta, fortunately, we're not seeing a broad famine scenario. Just like with the distinction between plague and upsurge, there's a distinction in terms of food insecurity, and I think that's very important to observe. Famine would be the absolute escalation that we're trying to jointly avoid among all partners. Huh? Below it is emergency and a food security crisis. And I think that's where we are finding ourselves and where we are very concerned. Let me make a very careful distinction of three layers that contribute to what some call a crisis within a crisis. And I let you judge which is the outer and which is the inner crisis. Initially, we were already very concerned because we found ourselves at the tail end of an El Nino, of a climatic anomaly. Keith has been talking about extreme rains. Other countries have been experiencing extreme droughts, but complete weather anomalies that, of course, impact on agricultural production, productivity, food distribution. It's very concerning to see that in the past, East Africa, the region we are discussing right now, has been hit by weather-induced food insecurity about every 10 years. That has accelerated to about every 2.5 years. And that is too short of a time span for any country, region, or farm to recover, for that matter. So that is layer one. We're at the tail end of a climate abnormality that might become much more frequent. Second, corona comes on top. Within corona, the corona situation, we find ourselves, some refer to it as shortages in midst of plenty. There are severe disruptions to the movement of food items. We even have countries, without naming them individually, that have imposed movement restrictions so that on one side of the country, farmers destroy their produce because they can't get it to market. And in other parts of the country, people go hungry. So this is extreme, like lockdown, plus the economic recession reduces the disposable income of people so they can't even afford to buy the food. And now locust enters this equation. And I don't say it comes on top. These are three parallel developments. And I don't want to dwell on what locust does to the crop and to livestock because we've discussed that. But what does corona also do to the livestock, to the locust control effort? I mean, we do see that in addition to travel bans and airport closures, this has implications also on the ability of the locust fighters to pursue their jobs. Movement of people, movement of goods, supply of agrochemicals, protective equipment, spraying gear. You can imagine how this plays out. And then finally, this plays out, these three factors play out in geographies that I would already have considered food security hotspots by any standard. Most of the countries we are discussing here, Yemen, South Sudan, Zimbabwe, are in one or the other form impacted by fragility and by disruptions to food provision. So it's not locust alone. We need to be very concerned of this being now a culmination of a range of very unfortunate and potentially more frequent factors.
Thanks very much. And actually, you have tackled a very frequent question that we have received in the chat about food security. So I think it's very well tackled in your answer. Thank you very much. Does anyone else wants to add something on that one? Maybe Jimmy, you want to add? Okay, good.
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
I think Mr. Holger mentions a very good part, and I just wanted to bring it in terms of what this means for the smallholder farmer, because we tend to look at the forest and fail to focus on the tree. If you look at the impact, especially with the smallholder farmers, especially in Africa, this kind of loss that Mr. Holger has just explained very well, to the farmer, this means an absolute loss of livelihood. So if I can give you, we always say that on average, we are talking about the majority of the people living on under $1 a day. That is assuming they're able to get some income. In this situation, we are talking about people who are even hardly able to get that $1 to survive. So when you lose your limited agricultural produce, and then you are hit by this spate of challenges. We've just talked about COVID, the locusts and the floods and everything. You are basically reduced back to zero. So you are now talking about poverty of untold proportions. So we should not even deceive ourselves about someone who is probably in a welfare state. We are talking about people in an environment where they absolutely have nothing, and between them, it's basically they're being pushed to the edge of before the industrial or even the agricultural revolution. They have absolutely nothing, and these kind of problems obviously will be able to translate into social, political, and all other forms of problems that we have not even we might not be able to anticipate and discuss well in this call. So the threat and the damage to the farmer is very, very severe, and we have to keep that in mind.
Thanks, Jimmy. A question for Mr. Cressman. In Uganda, almost a quarter of the gross domestic product comes from agriculture, and still in many of the affected countries, food supplies are already critical, as we just described. What does this plague of locusts mean for the people there?
Well, I think we've already heard quite extensively from our other guest speakers, what this, means in real terms. But also, as Holger has mentioned, in the future terms too. This is very important to consider in terms of rebuilding livelihoods, food insecurity, and these type of issues. What is going to happen with the locusts in the region? What is going to happen with the locusts in Uganda, for example? Now, at the moment, fortunately, the locusts will be passing through Uganda and going north, to their summer breeding areas in Sudan. But if those control operations are not successful this summer and there's good rains, there can be a reinvasion of East Africa, of countries like Kenya and Uganda by the end of the year, and then well into next year. And I think this comes to an important point that we haven't really touched upon yet, but I'm sure we will, and that's cooperation and collaboration at all different levels. So at the international partnership levels, with the donor community, but also with the countries themselves. I mean, as Holger mentioned, there are countries that one side of the country is a bit shut down from the other side of the country. So it's, equally important that within big countries or decentralized countries, that there's absolutely the most closest collaboration and cooperation to fight this menace, to fight the locusts.
Yeah, and it's a very good bridge to the next topic or the block of topics is solutions. What can be done against the crisis? I would like to hear from Mr. Tan. You said you need immediate help. What does this immediate help look like?
Looks like if some farmer loses his crop, I think he needs seeds, he needs inputs, and some monetary help, some economic help, so that he's back on his feet. He can sow his crops, and that can be in many ways. It can be through government participation, NGOs, seed companies. If they all come together, there should be a plan. There should be a fund, and I'd rather say it should be the coordinating agencies and all countries who are affected by this. They should be working together 24 hours, 7 days, 365 days a year, dedicated funds, ready with the resources. And like I did say, nip the evil in the bud. The breeding grounds. Spray those parts early, look after it. And whenever there is going to be a problem, the resources should be there before there's an attack. Right now, what is happening, the resources are not reaching where there already has been an attack. And by the time the resources come, the locusts have made their attacks and farmers are losing their crops. So we have to be one step ahead of them. And micro level also, this is at the macro level, and at the micro level, I did say, we have to educate the farmers, okay, this can be done, these sprays are good for you, you can spray your crop by using these pesticides or whatever it is. Like Bayer has some very good products. This is an deltamatrin, Fipronil is there, and they're making a good effort. And like in our area, they have put up some banners and pamphlets. They're distributing pamphlets and at the village level. Okay, be cautious. These are the ones. These are the pink ones. These are the yellow ones. Yellow ones breed. Pink ones are the younger lot. So they're trying to educate the farmers, which I think is a very good effort.
Excellent. Mr. Cressman, Mr. Kray, from your point of view, what can be done against this crisis?
I think there's several things that can be done by different actors within this crisis. If we just start at the farmer level, for example, obviously many smallholder farmers are not going to have the resources to spray pesticides, to purchase them and to spray them safely and effectively. FAO, we advocate really that spraying of desert locust infestation should be done by the national authorities. These are the people that have the correct equipment, they have the safety measures, and they have the technical know-how to do that, to get the most effective results in those operations. Now, it doesn't mean that the farmers can't do anything. They do play a very important role. There are, some very simple steps that they can take to try to protect their crops, and also, of course, to inform the authorities, where the locusts are, so that the control operations can be done. But really, if we're going to reduce the locust upsurge, it's not going to be done by crop protection. It's going to be done by hitting the locusts at the source areas, in those breeding areas. And these are outside of the crops. These are in the deep desert. So this is the very important role that national countries and national locust programs have to play. But of course, the situation has overwhelmed their capacities. So here then we turn to our international partners. Such as the World Bank, such as the other donors who have been very generous so far, but still, we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. There's much more work that needs to be done, much more assistance that needs to be provided. And we have learned this year, in fact, that, that assistance does not only go to control operations. So a portion, perhaps 50% of that, goes to safeguarding livelihoods and livelihood recoveries, exactly what Mr. Kang has been talking about. So I think that this is very critical. We understand that the international community has a lot on its plate. There's a lot of competing emergencies. COVID-19, of course, is not helping things. But they have been engaged very closely with FAO and with the countries, and we hope that that continues so that we can, bring this to an end.
You definitely very well described the, how to tackle the issue from the source, but we just got a question on the chat. What is the most effective way to get rid of the locusts when they are already in the field for the farmers themselves? What would you say?
Yes, of course, this does come to agrochemicals, the use of agrochemicals, and some of the products that Bayer has, that are recommended for desert locust control. If these are large areas, they can be sprayed by air, of course. If they're smaller areas, they can be sprayed by vehicle sprayers, or even smaller infestations by handheld or backpack sprayers. Indeed, but I would advocate, of course, two important issues here. One is the safety. We must pay attention to safety, because these are poisons, of course, and if used in an incorrect way, they can have negative consequences. And second, of course, is training. Training is absolutely critical to use those chemicals the most appropriately and effective ways.
Thank you. We have another interesting question on the chat, asking whether there's a biological control as a strategy. The person who raised the question said, I heard ducks can eat and eliminate them. Is that true?
Well, we'll start with the one that works and the one that doesn't work. How about that? There is a biopesticide available. It's a fungus that attacks only locusts and grasshoppers. So it's very, very good to use in populated areas where there's animals or beehives, sensitive areas, national parks, water body areas, and it's very, very effective and is very, very safe. The problem is, of course, that it's a natural organism. So it takes longer to produce than a chemical pesticide. So often the supply cannot keep up with the demand, especially in a situation like now. We've heard a lot about other alternatives like ducks. But the problem with the idea of ducks is that ducks simply can't eat enough locusts to have an impact. I mean, if you work that out, you would need almost billions of ducks to control the locust infestations. And remember, locusts are in the deserts, and ducks don't do very well in desert areas. So this is probably not going to have any impact. And you could create another problem, is how to manage so many ducks in the country.
Yeah, right. And I think at the end of the day, it's there's no silver bullet, right? There's an integrated program to tackle this, definitely. There's a specific question for the FAO. Is there any specific task force at FAO to tackle this issue and to take actions quickly?
Yes, of course. At the beginning of the year, FAO declared this as what we call an L3 emergency. This is the highest level of emergency in the UN system. This means this is a corporate priority. So this is a #1 priority of FAO, which means that we have at our fingertips all of FAO's technical expertise and resources to put onto this emergency. So of course there's a number of different levels of task force. Some are global, some are regional, some are national based, some are just internal, others are with our partners, because as I mentioned earlier, it's so important to be working together as a single team to address this issue.
You all mentioned the importance of partnerships to tackle this issue. I would like also to hear from Mr. Kray or Mr. Kiberu on what we can do together jointly to tackle this crisis. Maybe Mr. Kray, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much, Carlotta. See, I cannot start this response without really applauding the FAO and Keith's team and the leadership they provide. My team is in regular consultations with the FAO team. We meet on a weekly basis to address and coordinate on the most pertinent matters, because let's not forget, this is transboundary. It's not a single country. This is transboundary, it's migratory, it really requires a committed response. And I think, see, at any standard, if the world was not, unfortunately, distracted by the horrific COVID-19 situation, the locust situation would be all over the media because it is overwhelming. It is a horrific situation. And when FAO rang the alarm bell, it was very, very clear that it required two types of immediate funding. One is the funding that partners must be making available to sustain FAO's efforts, to keep us informed and coordinate this effort. The other is the funding that is needed to support countries and their farmers and those people impacted by the locust situation. And that is where we came in. The World Bank, in an expedited process, made available a $500 million facility in the first stage for countries in Africa and in the Middle East. This is a facility that is both a response facility, so countries can draw on it for their locust response, but it is also, and this is really a noteworthy feature, it is also a protective umbrella. So countries can join under it if they have locusts closing up on their territory and wanting to upgrade their preparedness. Under this program, countries can finance three types of activities. The first is surveillance and outbreak control. That is what we've discussed to quite a degree. The second activity, and this speaks more to the long-range character of the response program. The second is what we call livelihood protection and restoration. What we immediately see is that, of course, farmers impacted by the locust emergency are in need of means to either reestablish their crops or feed their livestock through a period without fodder. But equally important, and this is what many people forget, is the immediate provision of social protection assistance to people. People who see their ability to either sell food or buy foods compromised. And so countries can use the means of this Desert Locust Emergency Response Program to provide financial assistance to the most vulnerable through existing social protection schemes. So if you imagine my team being a team only of agriculturalists, that's not it. It's a blend team of agricultural economists and social protection specialists. And then the third element that the program finances is country preparedness. And that is really the longer range. How can we facilitate international coordination mechanisms, but also country systems to take advantage of more modern technology to hopefully tackle the next crisis better. I come back to that in a moment.
Okay, excellent. Maybe Jimmy, do you want also to elaborate on how partnerships would look like to tackle this crisis?
Thank you very much, Carlotta, and I think both Keith and Holger make very good points. So for me, I cannot overestimate the need for partnerships, call it collaborations. It's something that sounds so simple, but it's something that we often forget. And I think when you look at the current challenge, there is every opportunity, of course, to have the knowledge partners, the likes of the FAO, the Desert Locust Control Program. Then, of course, you've got the policy makers, the governments where we work. And then you've got the people like the World Bank that are able to bring the financial resources. And then, of course, companies like Bayer that are able to provide technological solutions. We've had of course, we have a very good opportunity to bring some of these innovations to the table. But they must come together in a harmonious and timely way. And I think an organization like FAO plays a fantastic opportunity to create, it's like a band. You bring all the players together so that you can bring all these solutions. When the problem happened in the northeastern side of Kenya and the northwestern side of Uganda, it's a border area, it was quite touching to see national armies being mobilized, trying to chase away the locusts with saucepans and then burning smoke to try and chase locusts, which were several meters above the trees. I mean, it was a little bit like trying to fight a lion with bare hands. You can't win it. So it's very, very important that you create this harmony. And I think the public sector working together with the private sector and also with the governments I think, stands the greatest chance of making this collaboration work. In Kenya, there is what is called the Agriculture Sector Network, ASNET in short, which has brought all the players in the agriculture sector under one roof. And what they're doing is, before, the sectors were working in silos. So you had the cereal growers in one silo, you had the pastoralists in one silo, then you had the private sector players in one silo. So in February, I think it was February 28th, there was a birth of a new organization called the Agriculture Sector Network. So for once, you brought all these players under one umbrella, and I can imagine the magic you would have if this ASNET, or the Agriculture Sector Network, combines forces with the FAO, with World Food Program, I'm sorry, with the FAO, with the World Bank, to try and bring customized solutions. I think we would be able to deal with this problem at infancy through early detection and this collaboration. So Carlotta, for me, all I would say is that there is no replacement for collaboration. Collaboration and partnership should be the operating word.
Excellent. We also have very interesting questions on the chat, and our participants, they are also looking beyond, let's say, conventional partners. They are asking, what about investment in data science, for example, to give us the ability to forecast similar outbreaks in the future, or maybe even to partner with NASA to help here? What do you think, the participants? Do you think that this is possible? Does this play a role?
I would say absolutely yes. You know, FAO, we're already partnering with NASA, with NOAA, with the European Space Agency, with, you know, Cambridge University, you know, all of these different entities. They have their own expertise. So obviously the idea here is to make use of that expertise, put it into practice. Let's get, you know, benefits from that in terms of better early warning, better forecasting, better, you know, response mechanisms that can be deployed by the national locust teams, but also, you know, by the local communities, the farmers. You know, involve the NGOs. They have a very important role to play in terms of a community awareness and community activism and action. So definitely, you know, this is, I think, as some of the speakers mentioned, a role that FAO actively plays. We try to bring everybody together at the same table, and just, you know, source out, you know, what each partner can contribute in a meaningful way, and not just for today, but also for the future.
Excellent. You all mentioned partnerships, collaboration. What could even citizens, ordinary citizens, society could do to improve the situation and in concrete to help the affected farmers? Is this something that we can all do?
I would like to say something. Basically, it is the farmers who are affected. So the city people still do not know the damage it can cause to the economy, to the food security, for the poor countries, and what's going to happen. And if you look at the population, see, I think almost half the world will be affected. And especially the poor countries, the African countries, India, and all these countries are going to be affected if we are not able to control it. And if you look at the statistics, like I think Mr. Kray had said, already where people are below poverty line and there's malnutrition, what will happen to the next generation if we can't feed the kids and they are malnourished? What's going to happen? So the city people, if they know to what extent this damage can be caused, so they will also come and try to help out. They should know how serious the problem is. So most of the people do not know how serious this is. We have to make them aware that this is a very serious problem.
Thank you, Carlotta. If I may come in on this one. I think what we can all do as global citizens is to approach it with a state of mind of this being a dramatic situation. And we're not asking for like donations or for monies or so, but I am encouraging people to support the principles of coordination and of solidarity, even across continents, to help fight this dramatic situation. I do know that in the current environment, it is at times easier to think monolateralism and not international solidarity. But I really encourage that we all in the countries in which we partake in the political process, that we support international cooperation and development cooperation to address this.
Excellent. And I mean, looking at what we have right now, what can we do? What is needed to bring this issue or this plague under control? I mean, when or how this can be controlled right now?
Well, that's a question everybody's asking, isn't it? And that's one that's really, really difficult to answer. If we just look historically, how do these things end? They end for two reasons. One is the human intervention. So it's the control operations, the spraying that we've been talking about by aircraft and so on and so forth. But the other element is Mother Nature. So Mother Nature has to come into play here and help us rather than helping the locusts. And so far for the past 2 years, it's been helping the locusts, with these incredible rains and the cyclones and severe weather events. So we need to see a break in that somehow. So either that means there's a break in the seasonal rains, there's really unusually cold temperatures in the upcoming winter, maybe there's strong winds that carry the swarms out to sea where they perish. So it's going to be this unification of these two elements. When they come together, then we will see the situation decline and come back to a normal state. But until then, what that means is that we have to keep those all-important control operations going. As Holger has mentioned, they have to be going. This is a transboundary pest. So now those operations are in East Africa and along the border of India and Pakistan in the summer monsoon areas. But later this year, it'll shift to other countries. So those countries have to be ready to take on their own responsibilities as well.
Excellent. So we are reaching the end of the session. We have some minutes left. I would like also to have a round of final remarks, final recommendations. What are the solutions? Let's look a little bit into the future. And I would like all to give final remarks on that one. Maybe starting with Mr. Kang, what is the most important for you to share here today as a final remark?
I would say, as Mr. Holger said, okay, it has to be a combined effort. And like he said, okay, it is not transboundary, so it is not one country, okay, I'll do this, I won't do this. It has to be a coordinated effort. Everybody has to play his role and play it to the maximum. And like it was said, there are only two, human intervention and Mother Nature. And I hope Mother Nature helps us this year.
I hope so too. Maybe Mr. Chrisman, do you want to share final remarks?
Yes, of course, I agree entirely with the cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. I think most importantly, affected countries, the national governments, the state governments, they must take full ownership of this problem and really give it its level best in terms of not only controlling those locust populations in the source areas and the breeding areas, but then also responding to what is going on in terms of the impacts on farmers and pastoralists.
Excellent. Mr. Kray, final remarks from your side?
Yeah, thank you at first for having us and for convening this conversation. And when there's shadow, Carlotta, for me, there's always also light somewhere. And the light in this is that in the long term, I do hope that this crisis has brought three key matters back to the public attention. First, how important it is to leverage technology, and that technology is here. We've discussed today about remote sensing. We can discuss about drone application, but also on the use of safer ways of controlling swarms, which are all a domain in which I hope the private sector and you join us in an effort and in incubation for young entrepreneurs, Carlotta. Second, we would not have had this conversation about regional integration a couple of years ago. I'm so very encouraged. And I hope it brings back to the attention of those who influence these processes the importance of regional economic commissions such as IGAD in Africa, or the role of the African Union Commission, who really takes this on, and the role of an organization such as the FAO, who's really needed as a global knowledge body. And third, it brings to the fore the importance of good policy to help create incentives for farmers to embark on more climate smart ways of conducting agriculture. This will be a frequent occurrence. Today it's locusts, tomorrow it might be another situation. And see, as long as public incentives just go into fertilizer support or diesel support, that doesn't do anything about the resilience of enterprise. So these three matters come to the fore, and they make me optimistic about where we go once we've tackled this crisis. Thank you for having us, Carlotta.
And thanks for sharing that bright and positive message. That's very encouraging. Jimmy, from your side, any final remarks, final recommendations, how to tackle this and how to improve for the future?
Carlotta, first of all, I join everybody to say thank you so much for this fantastic conversation, and I hope we shall be able to have many more of these. And there is what they say, never waste a crisis. Right now, the world has been facing one of the biggest crises that we've been lucky to see. This crisis is of planetary proportions that literally the earth has literally come to its knees. And it would be a very big mistake if we don't take lessons. If you look at the problem of the locusts, we've noticed that they come in 25-year, 70-year cycles. That's a lot of time. And I can tell you, between now and the next wave of this scale, a lot will have happened. Probably you'll have new generations that won't know anything about it. I come from a country whereby we eat relatives of the locusts called grasshoppers. And whenever the season is on, you have people turning into instant millionaires. Actually, many of them thought that these locusts were an opportunity for food. But I just wanted to say that I think one thing that COVID and the locusts has taught us is the power of communication. I think every time you turn on the television, for example, today, even a child that was born yesterday has heard about COVID-19. But if the locusts come back again and we've forgotten the lessons that have been learned now, I think it will be a very big failing on our part. So for me, continuity and that communication is very important. And of course, the other thing on prioritization is very, very important. We always talk about development in terms of concrete, in terms of what I would call white elephant projects. But the real sustainable development is health, education, and food. You can't replace that. If those are sorted, and I like as I mentioned at the beginning for Bear, the vision of health for all and hunger for none. I think combines these very elements very well. And I think this will be an opportunity for us to ensure that, one, we continue to prioritize these, communicate better, and put all our investment in ensuring that we have sustainable food systems, and anything that comes as a threat should be dealt not in silos, but it should be dealt in partnership, as we've just discussed here. So I think for me, there are so many lessons, and as they say, only a fool doesn't learn from their mistakes. So this is an opportunity for us, I think, to better prepare for the future.
Excellent, thanks, Jimmy. And we have come to the end of the session. Unfortunately, time goes by very quick, but thanks a lot for the discussion. Thanks to more of 300 people that joined us today and followed the conversation. Thanks for the dialogue. And I can only encourage you to keep on having these discussions. As you said, keep on doing partnerships, because this is an issue that can only be tackled jointly. So I also invite you to maybe in some months from now to follow up on this discussion and see where we are. And I hope in a better place than today. With that, thanks very much. And I wish you a very good summer break. Thanks all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.